Most of my life outside of academia has really been understood. I've understood myself as an anti-Zionist Jew who's been fighting for Palestinian liberation however I can. I started teaching about Palestine in my classes, both as an adjunct professor when I finished my graduate work, and then when I got my job at Muhlenberg. And that was really part of my teaching practice. I've visited Palestine, but I haven't done long-term research there, but a lot of my career has been invested in thinking about how to teach about Palestine. I started teaching about Palestine at Muhlenberg the year I was hired in 2015 and incorporated Palestine into most of my classes because it was always relevant. And then I went to Palestine in 2018. And when I came back, I started teaching a class about Palestine. This is a huge part of why I teach about Palestine. I believe that if you know anything about the history of Palestine and the history of the occupation, you have to be an anti-Zionist. There's no way to know what's happening in Palestine and not position yourself that way unless you believe that genocide and settler colonialism are good things. I was very lucky, I suppose, to take a history class in high school with a teacher named Mr. Biedron, who has passed away but has changed my life. And, it's the 90s and it's in the United States. So everyone's very high off of the Oslo Accords and this idea of Middle East peace talks, as though if we can all just come around a table, power doesn't exist. We can just negotiate some kind of, solution to a settler colonial problem. And so Mr. Biedron organized the class like a peace talk.
Mhm.
And so students were assigned to groups based on the power that that country or entity would have. So 10 students were assigned to the United States, 8 students were assigned to Israel, maybe 3 students were assigned to Jordan. And I was the single student who was assigned to represent Palestine at these peace talks, these fake peace talks. And I don't know if Mr. Biedron had any plan when he assigned me Palestine, but it was the 90s. We didn't have internet. So I was doing as much research as I possibly could as a teenager who had grown up Jewish and had sort of seen Israel everywhere. It was never something that I felt connected to or compelled by, but I had only ever been taught about Israel. And all of a sudden, I had this incredible opportunity to learn about Palestine, and I took it very seriously. And what I learned was that, the myth of Israel circulated in the United States, the myth of Israel that, Jews in the United States and across the world sort of celebrate in the wake of the Holocaust was a complete fiction, and that actually it was a settler colonial project in which Palestinians were experiencing genocide and dispossession because of this entity that was Israel. And it changed my life. It was, I think, around October 13th, 2023, that the administration first started sort of dealing with the fact that there were a lot of complaints against me from mostly alumni and college donors, because in the United States, because the federal government is defunding education and putting all that money into funding genocides, we rely on private donors, and especially at a small private school like mine. So there was a lot of pressure on the administration to fire me. There was a investigation into my teaching, and that led to nothing. There was an investigation into my research and publications, and that led to nothing. And that was all through October, November, and December. So when I came back from the winter holidays in January, the second week of classes, I was basically put on leave. And what's happening in the United States, which is incredibly dangerous, is that we have something called, it's a labor law that is called the Equal Opportunity Non-Discrimination Policy, which has a list of identities, race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, etc., that are, even though we know that that's not necessarily true, they're seen as like inherent aspects of a person's identity, and you can't be fired or you can't be discriminated against based on these things. So in the United States, there's a big push to include Zionist under that, even though Zionism is an ideology. And so what's been happening in the United States, whether it be Joe Biden or the congressional hearings or New York University, there are these institutions that are arguing that Zionism and Judaism are the same thing. And so if you are critical of Zionism, you are being anti-Semitic. And so I reposted a slide on Instagram written by the Palestinian poet Rami Kanazi. And it was basically saying, don't normalize Zionism. And a student that I had never met, who was in a leadership role with Hillel, which claims to be the place for Jewish life on campus, but is actually a Zionist institution that is supported by Israel. That student filed a complaint against me saying that I violated the equal opportunity non-discrimination policy because that student identified as a Zionist, believed that Zionism and Judaism were the same, and I was denying that student access to an education because that student wouldn't feel comfortable or safe in my class. I've never met this person. And so that happened on January 24th, I believe. There was an investigation, and the college basically decided on May 30th that I would be, or they told me that I would be fired immediately with, no severance or whatnot, pending an appeals process. So that happened. We went through the first appeals process. That appeals process found in favor of the college. And now the case is in a second appeals process with a panel of faculty that had been appointed. So the first appeals was somebody who was hired by the college to basically say, you did it all well. The student said this, we believe the student. Now it's a faculty panel, which I'm hoping will rule in my favor because that's a terrifying precedent in higher education and free speech in the United States. I would say that almost all of the hate I've experienced has been coming from Zionist Jews. So basically Jews telling me that I'm not really a Jew, that I'm a monster, that I'm a Nazi, and I mean, in my opinion, that is Zionists telling on themselves, telling that, me exactly who they are. So it's devastating, but it's mostly devastating because what possesses a person to have so much hate towards a stranger? It's very confusing to me. In the US, similarly, it has depended on who you are, where you are, what freedom of speech means. I mean, colleges and universities are incredibly inequitable spaces. So there are always people who have protections and there's always people who don't. And that's just whether that be because of, background, it's much more dangerous to be a Palestinian scholar talking about Palestine and has been historically. I think for a while, I thought that because I was Jewish, I was protected more than my Palestinian Arab Muslim colleagues who would be easily called anti-Semite just for mentioning Palestine, where before October 7th, that seemed like I was called a self-hating Jew, but I wasn't really getting attacks of anti-Semitism per se. And I think what happened is that before October 7th, it was really dangerous to talk about Palestine on college campuses, to do research about Palestine. People would lose jobs, they would lose opportunities for sure. But I think that after October 7th, the way in which there has been such a crackdown on speech, in which the far right white supremacist like politicians in the US have weaponized anti-Semitism in order to shut down all criticism of Israel. And right now, I think that we have a right and a far right party in the US. We don't have, the Democrats are basically far right light. They're not even moderates anymore. And so there seems to be a partnership between the Democrats and the Republicans in this project of white supremacy to support Israel, to shut down all conversation about Palestine and Palestinian liberation. And people are losing their jobs, students are being expelled, the police are being called to, brutalize students and faculty at encampments. I am an alum of Columbia University. I got my master's there and I'm not allowed on campus. It's completely locked down. So it's a pretty chilling new McCarthyism. I mean, we have this history in the United States. Israel and the United States are the greatest threats to the global community right now. And Israel is showing us exactly who that state has been since 1948. It's a genocidal settler colonial state that has always been very clear about not just wanting to colonize all of Palestine, but move into Lebanon, move into Syria, move into the Sinai. And so I think that, the first step is that the United States needs to stop arming Israel. But on a larger stage, I would love to see a complete transformation in world order where the United States and Israel have this sort of seeming impunity to, spread Western imperialism throughout the world. It's a huge danger, and I think it's fueled by racism against Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, etc. Yeah, I think Israel is one of the biggest threats to our global community. Right now, we have two people running for president because we are a two-party system, and it's almost impossible to imagine a third party winning. We have two politicians who have both been very clear about wanting to continue genocide. I think that every time Biden or Harris talk about an arms embargo or ceasefire, et cetera, they prove themselves to be liars and they cannot be trusted. And I think what is happening in the US is that we are desperate for a leftist movement. We need, to break down this two-party system that basically creates a hostage situation with voters every 4 years. There is no good outcome to this election. And I hope that it leads to some kind of larger social uprising, shift, et cetera, that can, reframe the way in which we think about politics in this country, because voting is not going to save us.